Good morning, students. We had seen yesterday about the rise of the most major Mahajanpad, which was Magad, and how the early rulers of Magad, that is right from Bimbisar to Ajat and then Mahapadmananda, and then Dhanananda, and then, of course, when Chandragupta Maurya started his own dynasty, how important role he played, and then again Chandragupta's son, that was Bindusar. Okay, now, so how important was the empire? That's what we study today. Now, when historians began reconstructing early Indian history in the 19th century, the emergence of Mauryan Empire was regarded as a major landmark. Okay, and that is how it was felt that Magad had really influenced because the kind of reach it had. Magad today it appears to be just an area around Patna in Bihar today, but in those times it used to stretch till today's Pakistan, you know, and in the south right till Tamil Nadu. So it was a massive geography. It was a huge geography. Okay, and that is how powerful and influential rulers like Chandragupta Maurya and Bindusara and of course Ashoka the Great would have been. Okay, now many of the historians found the message of Ashokan inscriptions very different from that most of the other rulers, suggesting that Ashok was far more powerful and industrious. Industrious would mean hardworking, as also more humble than later rulers who adopted grand titles. So it was not surprising that nationalist leaders in the 20th century regarded him as an inspiring figure. Now, this is why they have laid emphasis to the point that Ashoka did not have those grand titles awarded to himself. It's like, Ashoka ruled almost everything. Virtually, wherever you set your eyes on, Ashoka was the ruler. Those areas came under his influence. But then he just preferred to call himself a simple Raja. Raja Ashok or Samrat Ashok, and that's what it was. But later, the people, in Indian history, whether the Hindu rulers or the Muslim rulers, they used to keep grand titles, fantastic titles, even if they ruled over an area which was not bigger than Dehradun, or they ruled over an area which might not have been bigger than Uttarakhand, right? But they would have great announcements about their own grand existence, which was absolutely untrue. Okay, and that is why today people admire Ashoka as one of the great ones. That's why he is known as Ashoka the Great, because it's not just because of the territory that he ruled over, but how and what he was as a human. He could have had anything but chose to lead a very simple life, a very low profile life. He was more concerned about the welfare of his people, the welfare of his kingdom, upholding the values in a society, upholding the integrity of his territorial empire, and basically worrying about the welfare of the people. Okay, and that's what. And why is it important is that because students, you have to understand that in the early stages of kingship, if this is the standard which is being set by your early rulers, then it becomes very obligatory on part of the later rulers to at least match those standards, at least keep those standards in mind, to keep those ideals in mind, to keep those philosophies and ideologies in mind, because they would have to understand that yes, this is how it should be, this is what ought to be. Okay, because if now if you have a situation where the people who actually have been the earliest ones in within your society, and it is all about chaos and murder and butchery, and just worrying about your own welfare, and no one taking care of the poor, so then that is what the precedent which gets set. But Ashoka, people like Chandragupta, they set very high ideals for the for their successors, even if not from their own family, from different clans, from different families, from different parts of the country, because uh, uh, they ruled over a huge geography. So even after the disintegration of Mauryan Empire, when different kingdoms came up, they always had this in mind that yes, the greatness is about those acts. you know eh, this is what they were supposed to do. They had this thing there, that this is what are the responsibilities of a ruler. It is not just that he can treat his empire as a personal property and do whatever he wished. Okay, so that is what it is about. And um, and that is why the early rulers were very, very important. Now, yet how important was the Mauryan Empire? It lasted for about, though it lasted for only about 150 years. Now, 150 years, when you talk about in historical terms, isn't much. Of course, it is something, but it isn't much. Okay, which is not very long time in the vast span of history of the subcontinent. Besides, if you look at the map too, you would notice the empire did not encompass the entire. But you have to understand one thing, that how did the Mauryan dynasty end? It started with Chandragupta Maurya, then it was Bindusar, and then Ashok. Now, till Ashok, these three generations, that is, or rather two generations, uh, things were perfectly fine. They were extremely powerful ruler, very charismatic, very hardworking as well, and naturally everything was under control. Okay, but after the death of Ashok, his successors were not as good as uh, their fathers and their grandfathers, and so they had no idea about how to manage such a vast geography which ran from today's Bangladesh to today's Pakistan, and from Kashmir to right till today's Tamil Nadu. It's a mind-boggling thing to do, even by today's uh, uh, great standards of technology, where everything is interconnected. You still would find it extremely difficult to rule such a vast geography and so many people. And uh, uh, but so and so that is why after Ashoka, it didn't last long, and the last ruler of the Mauryan dynasty was Brihadrat. Yes, so I don't know if it was mentioned in this chapter, but it was Brihadrat, and that ended around 180 BC. Yes, before Christ, 180 before Christ, 180 years before Christ. That was the last ruler. That was Brihadrat. He was assassinated and murdered by his own, not by some enemy king, or he did not lose a battle and got killed. Brihadrat was very interestingly killed by his own commander in chief, that is what you call in Hindi Senapati. He was murdered by him, and it was and even more interestingly, his Senapati, that is commander in chief, was a Brahmin, and he was not a Kshatriya. And it was then this commander chief, that is Pushyamitra Sunga, that's what his name was. He started his own dynasty, that is the Sunga dynasty. Okay, uh, the next topic, that is new notions of kingship, um, uh, chief and kings of south, the new kingdoms that emerged. So naturally, as we just discussed, that after Ashoka, naturally there was no one who could rule over such a huge geography on his own. So naturally, gradually, the areas got eroded. The erosion started happening. Different people, different powerful governors, different powerful ruling families started making their own kingdoms, and the ruler in Magad could not do anything to stop them. Gradually, Magad lost its prominence, its importance, its power, its wealth, because different areas in different parts of India were now being scooped out by different rulers. And naturally, now we had a lot of kingdoms and a lot of kings. So that's what we are now talking about: new notions of kingship, chiefs and kings in the south, the new kingdoms that emerged in the Deccan and further south, including the chiefdoms of the Cholas, Cheras and Pandyas in Tamilakam, the name of the ancient Tamil country, which included parts of present-day Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, in addition to Tamil Nadu, proved to be stable and prosperous. Students, I don't know if you have studied about these three families, but these were and there was another one which is Pallavas, which is not mentioned. I think it would be in the chapter. Um, Cholas and the Cheras and the Pandyas, they are extremely important ruling families. They were extremely important dynasties, ruling dynasties of South India. Like you had the Mauryas in the north, and similarly in south, the Cholas, the Cheras, and the Pandyas, they were, and the Pallavas, of course, and the Satavahanas as well. Of course, I'm sure if we would study about them in this chapter, they were extremely important. But let me tell you something about Cholas. Why Cholas are important and why they have been mentioned here is because Cholas happen to be one of the oldest dynasties in the world. Cholas. Okay. They ruled. Dynasties come and go. Like we just saw 2 minutes ago, that modern dynasty barely lasted for 150 years, right? But the Chola dynasty, it lasted for about what, 1600 years. It lasted. It started in 300 before Christ, though definitely then they were not as uh, big in size, because then in those years Chandragupta Maurya and Ashoka, they were the most powerful ones, and they occupied almost the whole of India. And the Cholas were there only in the southern part, and that too not in that too did not they did not control huge geographies. But they have been around, and they before their rule the rule of their family went on for almost 1600 years. This is one of the longest spans in this world. And then you have Cheras. Now Cheras today would be under the areas like Kerala, so they were mainly around. And Cheras did not rule for they, but they ruled for again for about 450, 500 years. But they were very, very ancient ruling families. Again, from 200 BC to about 300 AD, 350 AD odd. Okay, and the last one being the Pandyas, who had their capital in Madurai. Madurai, as we all know, very, very famous for its Meenakshi temple, one of the gems of great temple architecture anywhere on the planet. Okay, so that's what their capital was. And very interestingly, the Pandyas ruled not just in the southern fringes of India, but also there was a time when the whole Sri Lanka was under the Pandyan rule. And talking about the our Indian rulers ruling in abroad, that is, then I should also tell you that the Cholas, that is the first one that I just mentioned, that is who had ruled for about 1600 years. Very interestingly, the Chola rulers, especially the very two very famous ones, the Raja Raja one and Rajendra one, and they ruled. They were so powerful and they were so influential that their rule extended even till today's Malaysia and Indonesia. Yes, we shall continue. Thank you.